What's happening, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This segment's going to be a fantasy fight video between Frank Shamrock and George St Pierre. This one's a request. More than happy to do this video. It's a fun one to think and talk about, so let's get into it. Okay, so first let's start with Frank Shamrock, which is a mixed martial arts legend. Frank was in his prime way back in the day. We're talking like the 90s, early 2000s. He was the first UFC light heavyweight champ, which is kind of funny because he was a small light heavyweight. He really wasn't a light heavyweight. He won that title, I believe, from Tito Ortiz. That was an interesting fight. Frank was one of the first very well conditioned fighters from back in the day, also well-rounded. So he used his cardio and conditioning to wear out the bigger and stronger fighter Tito Ortiz and took him out via that route, which was brilliant. But Frank trained kickboxing and stand-up with Maurice Smith, very accomplished kickboxer, old school UFC fighter, talented striker. Frank, of course, was from the Lion's Den and trained under his older adopted brother Ken Shamrock, who, along with Frank Shamrock, in my opinion, were pioneers of the leg lock game, especially Ken, way ahead of his time as far as like leg locks. And Frank certainly soaked up some of that talent. So Frank was explosive. He was very strong for his size. He had really good cardio and conditioning. He was well-rounded. He had high fight IQ for back then. Pretty much the complete package. To the point that if you take a prime, in shape, injury-free Frank Shamrock, you take a time machine, put him in present mixed martial arts, I don't think he gets washed out. Now, granted, I think the fighters of today overall have evolved. It's a new era. These guys are training everything from a young age, but you still got some one-dimensional guys out there. I don't think Frank gets walked over by everybody. I think he certainly could win some fights. A prime Frank Shamrock. Which brings me to George St Pierre. George St Pierre, I mean, there's no question this man is one of the greatest of all time. He is the GOAT to some people. He might be my GOAT. It's tough to say. You have a few guys in that argument, and there's merit for each one. I could drop some names. You got GSP, you got John Jones, you got Anderson Silva, you got Demetrius Johnson, you got Fedor. But anyway, continuing, I mean, it really doesn't get better than George St Pierre. The man can literally do it all. All the attributes I mentioned about Frank Shamrock, George St Pierre has, and probably on a next level. He's crazy strong, super conditioned, really impressive fight IQ, phenomenal mixed martial arts wrestling, one of the best wrestlers to ever compete in MMA, which is nuts because he doesn't have a wrestling background. He just picked it up along the way. GSP's actual background is Kyokushin karate. Just special athlete. Submission grappling, check. Super tough. I don't think GSP gets enough credit for his toughness. I do think he has a great chin. Yes, we saw him TKO'd by Matt Serra, but he didn't go out. He got TKO'd. He was very conscious. Matt Serra hits hard. We also saw Carlos Condit land a head kick on GSP that would have knocked out a lot of people. We also saw GSP take big shots from Johnny Hendricks, who would touch people on the chin and they would go out. So yeah, I think GSP's chin is actually underrated in toughness. But if you take Frank Shamrock and George St Pierre, even though Frank Shamrock was the UFC light heavyweight champ at one point, he was a small light heavyweight. He shouldn't have been in that class. I think max Frank weighed 190 to 199, under 200 if I'm not mistaken. George St Pierre walking around, he's like in the 180s. They're comparable size, like prime for prime. Who's stronger? I mean, Frank Shamrock was a physical specimen back in the day. That guy was diced. But GSP is GSP. I think George St Pierre is the stronger fighter, prime for prime. And part of that is like leverage and technique. There's something about a person that is an exceptional wrestler. The use of leverage, body weight, body mechanics, it amplifies your strength that you're carrying already. Strength I'm going to give to GSP. Knockout power is tough. I mean, Frank Shamrock looked like he hit hard. I didn't view him as a knockout artist. He kind of wore people out. I think their KO power is probably comparable. Submission grappling, well, if we're talking about outside of mixed martial arts, it gets more competitive with Frank Shamrock. But in MMA terms, it balances out quite a bit. Frank was very, very tricky. But I'm going to say clean jiu-jitsu, submission grappling, technique for technique, I got to go with GSP. Overall striking skill, George St Pierre. I just think GSP was more fluid, more technical, cleaner. Frank Shamrock was impressive standing for yesteryear stand-up back in the day. Definitely had kickboxing skill, definitely had technique, but I think GSP is the superior striker. His in and out movement, his defense, his jab was clean. GSP had great low kicks, spinning back kicks. He really could do it all on the feet. Fight IQ, once again, how could you pick against George St Pierre as far as fight IQ? So in this fight, I think GSP would jab Frank Shamrock's head off, but a safer route for him, I think, even though Frank had great submission grappling, I think the safer route would be to wrestle Frank Shamrock, take him down, gain top control, beat him up on the ground. Do I think GSP could tap out a prime Frank Shamrock? Not sure. TKO via strikes and exhaustion? Yeah, more likely. And this is coming from a person who actually watched Frank Shamrock in his prime back in the day. A person that was inspired by him. So I'm well aware of what Frank Shamrock was capable of. I saw him fight live. I saw his resurgence when he came back to MMA and Strikeforce. I've seen his whole career. And to me, if a prime Frank Shamrock fought a prime George St Pierre, man, I'm going to say 8 times out of 10, maybe more, GSP wins that fight. I just think he's too smart, too well-rounded, better conditioning, way better wrestling. Where Frank would be competitive is in the submission grappling. But even then, I think GSP's too technical there as well. I got GSP via decision, or more likely stoppage via TKO from strikes. Specifically ground and pound. I think he would wear Frank Shamrock out. But not taking away anything from the legend, because I love Frank Shamrock to death. I don't think the man gets enough credit. He was way ahead of his time. And the fact that, well, I believe anyway, you can take a prime Frank Shamrock, drop him in MMA today, and he's not going to be a scrub. He could be in some competitive fights. Welterweight, if he can make lightweight, for sure. I'm not sure if he can make lightweight. In his day, in his prime, he was kind of buff. But anyway, guys, yeah, I think GSP would put a pace on him. If the fight stood standing, I think he would just jab Frank Shamrock's head off. I don't think Frank would bring anything on the feet that GSP wouldn't be able to deal with. I just don't think Frank was clean enough on the feet. And then in the grappling, GSP's wrestling would really be a huge advantage. And I know Frank Shamrock tapped out Kevin Jackson, who I believe was an Olympic gold medalist, or silver. Pretty sure gold. But Kevin Jackson had no submission grappling. That was old school UFC, where you could know a guillotine, you could know an armbar, you could know a heel hook, and be way ahead of the game. Some guys back then didn't know what the hell you were doing to them. That's not the case in modern mixed martial arts. GSP would not get armbarred. He would take Frank down at will, beat him up, wash, rinse, repeat, do that for a few rounds, wear him out. Those are my honest thoughts, and I love Frank to death again. But anyway, guys, let me know in the comment section, what do you think about this fantasy fight? Do you agree or disagree? I got GSP. Who do you think will win and why? Thanks so much for watching the video. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. And until the next one, take care. Later, guys.